Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
Countries are paying tariffs. Right now, China's paying a 104% tariff. Think of it, 104%. Now, it sounds ridiculous, but they charged us for many items 100%, 125%. Many countries have. They've ripped us off left and right. But now it's our turn to do the ripping. I deal with other countries all the time. I am right now on tariffs where they want to make a deal with us. We don't necessarily want to make a deal with them. We're happy the way we are, taking our $2 billion a day. But they want to make a deal with us. I know what the hell I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And you know what I'm doing, too. That's why you vote for me. I'm telling you, these countries are calling us up, kissing my ass. They are dying to make a deal. Please, please, sir, make a deal. I'll do anything. I'll do anything, sir. And then I'll see some rebel Republican, some guy that wants to grandstand, say, I think that Congress should take over negotiations. Let me tell you, you don't negotiate like I negotiate.
Well, guess who that was? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and/or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. All right, we have Elie Honig with us back today. We'll chat with Elie in just a second. But first, let's get right into the big thing of the week. Tariffgate. Tariffgate and the roller coaster stock market. So we got to talk about that clip for a second, because there's so much material there. There's so much pathology there. Mm-hmm. There's so much lying there. But I got to say, my favorite part is they're kissing my ass. Because that's what it's all about, isn't it? This is all about his insatiable need for adoration, attention, validation. That's what motivates him on every single thing he does in his life. It's why he demands loyalty from everyone. It's just all about feeding Donald Trump's diseased id, isn't it?
100% capitulation all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all he ever wants. And you know that he's lying. Well, you know he's lying when he says anything, but as soon as he says, sir.
That's it. That's the tell.
Yes. All of the leaders of these countries are being like, sir, please.
Yeah.
Trump 2.0 is an adult version of Trump 1.0. So the dementia has set in dramatically. Obviously, the media never mentions it, but things he says make no sense all the time. None of it.
No. Well, they never really made sense.
Yes, but they're on steroids now.
All right, that's fair.
And he says like 75 countries have called. And then there was a report yesterday that was like, it's actually like 15. And what are they saying when they call? Like, hello, this is Sweden. We want to talk about the tariffs. Like,
please, sir, please.
Is that how is it? Mr. Trump, we have Uruguay on line 2. Hold on. I'm talking with Cuba. Like, what is happening at the imagine a woman at the switchboard, like with the old fashioned switchboard, like, oh my God, it's France on the tell him France is on the phone. What? Like, he creates these scenarios that somehow he thinks makes the situation look so fucking awesome, and doesn't realize that we're listening going, is this guy out of his fucking mind?
I think that's his secret sauce, my friend.
So what else do you guys think about this tariff sitch?
I think in the history of the world, no single person has caused more damage to the global economy. Consumer sentiment is now plummeted to the second lowest level on record, and that's going back to 1952.
Yeah, that came out this morning, right?
Yeah.
The latest numbers.
And we know that somewhere north of 70% of everything that both Amazon sells and Walmart sells is sourced from China. And we have a 145% tariff. The idea that this won't bring us into a potentially deep recession defies logic. So he is single-handedly destroying the American economy and the global economy at the same time, and destroying future trust by lowering the value of the dollar forever, potentially. And yet, while there are some Republicans making some noises, nobody is taking the keys away from this drunk driver.
Well, kudos on your gloom and doom scenario, which is what we expect from you. And you may end up being 1,000% correct. We just don't know yet. I mean, JP Morgan, which the week before last had upped its global recession risk to 60%, on Wednesday lowered it to 45%. So there are people who watch this shit very closely who may not be as concerned as they were. And as we know with Trump, he's so erratic and unpredictable, and his policies are based on nothing but whim and id and fiat, that it is quite possible that, not with everything, but much of what is a major concern right now could be that much less of a concern in a week, in a month, and the economy that he inherited was the greatest in decades. And an economy is like a speeding freight train. You know, you pull that emergency brake, you're not stopping on a dime. It's going to take a long while to stop. And economies don't turn on a dime. So there's this window of like, all right, he can play around with his dumb fuckery for the next 30 or 60 days. And as long as things sort of end up okay and he continues to cave and he rolls back all this shit, which most people think he's going to do, it lessens the likelihood of the worst case scenario, Matty, that you're talking about.
Sure. The problem is it doesn't matter what Trump does tomorrow because we don't know what he's going to do next Tuesday.
Sure.
And so that's where it's impossible to predict anything good because all that he's done is really bad. I mean, the only thing that I think we can confidently say is that Trump is erratic, a sociopath, and a moron, and he's running the economy.
How do you really feel, Matty?
I mean, I don't think that
Stop
that's
mincing
in dispute.
your words. We don't mince words in the back room. Yeah. If I was to make a bet on this, I would say that a week or two from now, we're going to have a much different conversation. And I say that because we saw Donald Trump cower this week. We saw him terrified. We also saw, which we hadn't seen yet, the smarter people around him have impact.
One of them.
That's all you need is one. From what I understand, and this was not what people were saying on Wednesday, but they were saying it yesterday. It was not just Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, but it was also Howard Lutnick. There was a lot of people who were saying to him, sir, this is not good. When the bond market is tanking, that's real catastrophic stuff financially. And so we saw that he has the capacity to listen to whoever is the Steve Mnuchin of this administration, which thankfully there's someone like Bessent who has the ability to drill some sense into this guy's head. He caved. He fucking caved. That's what Donald Trump does. So it seems like people are just sitting there and going, okay, let him have his 3 days or a week or 2 weeks of feather clucking and chest beating, where he then imagines he's got a 20-inch penis and everything is great in the world, and then he can walk it back because he feels like, now I can walk it back.
It's very possible, but how did we get to 20-inch penis? That was very specific.
Jen. That's what you grab onto, no pun intended.
I'm all stuck with that. It can be edited out.
He has to channel a little bit of Scott Galloway sometimes.
No, we love the dirty jokes in the back room. Come on. That's right. If Pivot can do it, if Scott Galloway and Kara can have a good time with the dirty jokes, so can we.
So I finally started listening
Wait,
to
I want
them.
to do, all right, this is a perfect opportunity to do my Scott Galloway impression.
Oh.
Okay. So, that was good. That was good, right? That was good. That's what he
think you
does
got
every
him.
time he
Yes.
says a dirty joke.
Her response to him is so funny.
But all right, so Jen, any non-20-inch penis comments about the tariffs?
Nope.
I think in the end, it's the tube of toothpaste. How much toothpaste has come out of the tube whenever this thing reverses? And that's what we have to worry about.
Yeah, I still maintain that politics is cyclical. I remember being sick to my stomach when George Bush was elected president. I couldn't believe he won. I felt like the idiots who I went to high school with who were the fucking class clowns who were never going to be anything. Somehow that dude became president. And then we had
4 more years of that.
And then we had Obama, right? We had Barack Obama, and it felt like, oh my God, this is the greatest thing ever. Look at America. Look how far we've come. It's so cool, amazing. And then we had Donald Trump, and that was like, he makes George Bush seem like not the class clown, but the valedictorian, right? And then we had Joe Biden, and we're like, we're out in the streets banging the pots and the pans. Remember that Saturday? It was like ding dong, the witch is dead. We're back. We are back to normal.
Yep.
And then we get fucking Donald Trump again. And now it seems like we're all fucking chicken littles. The sky is falling. It's over. It's doomed, whatever. I'm not buying it. America is about to celebrate its 250th birthday soon. We are the greatest democracy in the world. We will always be the greatest democracy in the world because I believe that America and American democracy is bigger, better, stronger than any fucking Donald Trump ever. That said, doesn't mean it ain't ugly. Doesn't mean we're not having some serious challenges. Doesn't mean there's going to be collateral damage and residual damage that lasts a long time. But because politics is cyclical, one change leads to a lot of changes. And so that's what we got to focus on. We got to focus on getting the changes started. The changes start with November 2026. Get control of the House, maybe get control of the Senate, but that's the start. And then you win back the White House in 2028, and then you start to roll back a lot of this stuff and unwind to a better place. I mean, look, if we have a great Democratic president in 2028, it's hard for me to imagine that world leaders, our allies, in 2030, when they just saw 2 years of America being America again, in that way America needs to be again, that much of this stuff won't close up like a sinkhole. I just don't buy that. I don't believe it.
Well, it feels like a long time ago, but this past Saturday, there was a national resistance protest.
Hands off it was.
Hands off. But honestly, it was the first time in I don't like protests. I don't like crowds. It was raining. It was cold, yada, yada, yada. But to be in a place surrounded by people who were happy and hopeful and
fighting back,
it was invigorating.
Yeah.
And to watch on the news, place after place after place. So, you know
and
what?
To your point,
it's starting.
Yeah, to your point, how does that differ from November and December? Huge, right?
You mean you're talking about when everybody was in a hole and crying?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to do is say, remember how we felt in the month, 2 months, 3 months after the election, how we felt right after the inauguration, and then compare it to what you just said about today.
Well,
then think about where are we going to be in 3 months from now? Where are we going to be in 6 months from now? Where will that sentiment and what you just said, where will that be in October and November of 2026? And that's my point.
Well,
time.
Yeah, I mean,
things need to evolve.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well.
Yep.
All right. Let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Mike Johnson, for holding his Republican House members together to pass the budget and for reaching an agreement to kill proxy voting.
My winner is China, which stands to benefit significantly as Trump will inevitably cave on tariffs, and China is already expanding trade relationships with numerous countries, which will no doubt help them in the future. My loser is the entire academic establishment. Under the lie of fighting anti-Semitism, the full machinery of government, spearheaded by the ideological warriors like Chris Rufo, has launched what can only be described as a scorched earth campaign against America's educational institutions.
My loser is just Donald Trump. My winner, the U.S. judicial system, which continues to uphold the rule of law, due process, and our democracy. And that gets us to the weekly rant. So Donald Trump on Wednesday finally announced the much-anticipated 90-day pause on tariffs, sending the stock market skyrocketing. Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed almost 3,000 points, and the NASDAQ almost 1,900 points. One of the biggest days ever on Wall Street. But by the end of the day, if you had only listened to Trump and his sycophants, you'd conclude that Trump merely added yet another solid day of gains to an already strong, healthy market. But we, of course, know that that's not the truth, because leading into Wednesday, and since Trump took office in January, the Dow had been down 13%, and the NASDAQ had cratered 23%. And there was an erasure of about $10 trillion in equity and wealth because of this moronic, unnecessary, and totally unprovoked trade war that he's started with every country in the world, even the ones with just fucking penguins. But that didn't stop the sycophants from talking about what a genius he is, how brilliant this strategy worked out, that he's such an amazing deal maker, that only he had the courage to do what no other president had done, and that he won. Not so fast. We're not going to let Trump do what he always does, which is to be the arsonist who puts out his own fire and then plays the hero, especially when just the next day the markets plummeted again, because reality set in with traders about the chaotic mess that still exists. Speaking on the carnage on Wall Street and in the global markets in the last several weeks, former Fed chairwoman and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said this, quote, "We had a very well-functioning economy, and President Trump has taken a wrecking ball to it. This is the worst self-inflicted wound that I have ever seen an administration impose on a well-functioning economy." So we're not going to let him take a victory lap when in fact the markets and the economy remain in an extremely precarious position of uncertainty. Trump may have pulled the knife halfway out for a brief 18-hour period, but it's still in the body, the wound is still open, the bleeding continues, and the trade wars march on. There are still 10% universal tariffs on all countries, a 25% auto tariff, 20% steel and aluminum tariffs, a whopping 145% tariff on China, from whom we import 14% of our goods, and a new threat of pharmaceutical tariffs, all of which likely can push us into recession. But let's circle back to the reason for Wednesday's announcement. It wasn't because of Trump's bravery or incredible business acumen. Trump caved because the overnight bond market went into a tailspin, causing fear among traders that Japan and China might be dumping U.S. government bonds and raising concerns about the U.S. economy as a safe haven. No art of the deal here. It was art of the panic attack. Trump and his economic team understood that this could have catastrophic consequences on the global economic order if the idiot-in-chief didn't act swiftly. So much so that Kevin Hassett, Trump's director of the U.S. National Economic Council, admitted on CNBC that this bond meltdown added, quote, a little more urgency, unquote, to Trump's decision, which in Trump speak means it was the reason for the decision. So yeah, Trump did what he always does, which is to talk tough and carry a little stick, eventually folding like the $2 lawn chair he is. Expect more cowardly capitulation over the next week or two as the market turmoil continues. All right, let's get to Elie Honig. He's an attorney and CNN senior legal analyst and the best-selling author of Hatchet Man and also Untouchable, How Powerful People Get Away With It. He's a former assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. He also hosts podcasts, writes for Cafe, Vox Media, and writes a weekly column for New York Magazine. Elie, welcome back into the back room. I think you probably have the honor of being the most... you've been on this podcast more than anybody.
I'm the Tom Hanks of your podcast, right?
You deserve like many bathrobes.
Exactly. You did send. Oh, I should get it. You did send me my 5-timers bathrobe, which I have downstairs.
Yeah, you might be due for like a 15-timer bathrobe by this point.
I saw someone else. I think Essie, right? Essie Cup has one, right?
Yeah, she's been on a lot. Rick Wilson's been on a lot. There's a few people that have been on a lot. But in any case, there's so much going on I want to talk to you about. But I want to start off with a bit of a macro issue before we get into more of the pressing legal cases involving Trump. The judicial system right now has done a great job in serving as a critical check on Trump, for the most part. It's certainly rejecting his most egregious, unconstitutional executive orders. But can the courts, which are being tested and attacked like never before, continue to hold like this?
I agree with you, first of all. I'm glad you phrased it the way you did, Andy. And I think the answer is yes, the courts can and will hold. And I do think the courts have done a really important, really the only entity out there that's doing any pushback, that's engaging in any pushback. Obviously, none's going to come from Congress. None's going to come from internally at DOJ, which I've been writing about and we can discuss. And I'm not saying that everyone's going to on either side is going to love every decision that comes out of the courts, but by and large, and there's examples of this just from the last couple of days, the courts have imposed powerful restrictions and guardrails on some of these attempted abuses by Donald Trump. Can the courts hold? Yes. You know, one thing I will say, again, as long as we're starting on a semi-optimistic note, the Trump administration has not openly, intentionally defied the courts. Yes, they've come close, probably too close. They've played fast and loose. They've been what I termed intentionally sloppy on some of the deportation cases, but they've never gone into court. And anytime they've been called out on that, they've never said, yeah, well, guess what? Screw you. We intended to defy you. Every time they've gone, no, we didn't intend to defy you.
Right.
Here's why we didn't. And the Supreme Court has also been going out of its way to make clear, like, we're not playing here. And that's conservatives and liberals alike. Like, you are not to defy. And I think as long as, I'm not saying everything's going to be great and roses and everything, but the courts are doing their job. They're not ruling against Trump by any means on every case, but they are drawing important lines. And I think just to get into one specific, I think if we look at the decision that came out a couple of days ago on the Alien Enemies Act, it's a good example where, you know, the Trump administration was spiking the football like they just won a monumental victory. Because on the surface, what the court did is say, well, you can resume the process of these Alien Enemies Act deportations. But if you read anywhere beyond the top line, the court says, and we're now imposing real restrictions. There's real due process now. People do have the right to challenge through habeas, and they do have to be given reasonable notice. You can't just whisk them out on a flight like while the hearing's happening. And so I guess you could call that a win if you're the Trump administration, but it's also a win if you believe in some minimal, at least, due process for people. So I do think the courts have generally, it's easy to bash the courts or whoever, but I think by and large, the courts have done an effective job.
Yeah, and you could say the same thing about the ruling SCOTUS last night on the Kilmer-Abrego-Garcia case,
Abrego.
where also Trump is doing a victory lap, but at the same time, legal experts are saying, no, this is a big win for the rule of law and for due process.
It's similar because the Supreme Court doesn't quite say you have to bring him back. They say you have to try to bring him back. You have to facilitate bringing him back. And by the way, they say once again, he is entitled to due process. You can't just whisk him away, say, whoops, we screwed up, but now he's in a different country, so sorry. If you look down to the Court of Appeals, Fourth Circuit, there's a there's a conservative judge named Harvey Wilkinson, who's probably the single most established and respected conservative Court of Appeals justice or judge in the entire country. And he said, I want to get his quote. It's so good. He said something like, this is a recipe for perfect lawlessness. If you could just snatch people up, throw them out and go, whoops, they're out now. Nothing we can do. And I only read the Supreme Court decision as a win for Trump in that they stopped short of saying, you must produce the body. They said you must facilitate, right? There's this whole facilitate, effectuate thing going on. But they say and they also make a point of saying we're not effing around here. You are going to have to answer questions about what you did to bring him back. The Supreme Court's not giving him a wink and a nod. They're giving him a little bit of a slap on the hand. We know what you're doing. And this comes from the conservatives as well as the liberals.
Yeah, but they did in a sense kick it back to the district court.
They did. Yeah.
And it was at the district court level where, unless I'm mistaken here, there was an order to bring him back.
Yeah. So just to the district court said you have to bring him back by 11:59 p.m. on what I think was Monday night. Robert said, hold on, let's pause that. What the Supreme Court says is you have to facilitate, if not effectuate. Facilitate means actually help make it happen. Effectuate means make it happen. And so I guess what the Supreme Court is saying is we in the judiciary don't quite have the authority to instruct a certain result out of the executive branch, but we can tell you have to try it. And by the way, maybe I'm oversimplifying here. Of course they can bring this guy back. He's in there, the jail that they're renting, that we, the U.S., are renting for $6 million. The CECOT, C-E-C-O-T is the abbreviation for it, in El Salvador. Kristi Noem, the DHS secretary, publicly has bragged that this jail is a tool in our toolkit in enforcing immigration. It's like, he's there. I promise you, if we cared to, we could go, hey, guys, we need that one back. Like, it's not that hard. It's not like El Salvador is going to say no, and we're going to say, well,
the crazy thing about Kristi Noem is that the other day she said, yeah, there was an administrative error. He was deported. Yeah. He was accused, wrongfully of being a gang member, but
she didn't concede that part, but yeah.
I'm sort of, embellishing, but it's the essence of what she said. I mean, look, when you say we're sending people to El Salvador because they're in gangs, but there was an administrative error, well, that means you screwed up because he shouldn't have done.
But to be clear, the administrative error that they're admitting is there was a finding by an immigration judge a few years ago, 2019. The administrative judge actually found that there was evidence that he was a member of MS-13, which I think is highly dubious, but that was the finding. The order, though, was you cannot deport him to El Salvador because he might be retaliated against. And so, like, the one thing that the administration legally could not do was put him on a plane to El Salvador. That's what they did. Theoretically, and I've heard other people say this, look, they're not going to let him back in the United States. Like, I'm confident of that. They've already gone on record. They've already said he's a gang member. He's dangerous, all this. I mean, I think they could probably get him back here, give him his due process, whatever, and then send him to probably any other country than El Salvador. So that the error was in the sending him to El Salvador, but they definitely have not backed off. Like, they are making this guy out like he's Chapo Guzman, which, at least the record of the last 5-6 years is very inconsistent with.
Yeah. But the irony is that they admitted the mistake, but don't want to do anything to correct it.
And Andy, that's the thing that blew my mind. I mean, if you read the briefing, the official DOJ government position is, yes, we messed up, and sorry, there's nothing we can do now. Hands clean. Like, it's out. This is why Judge Wilkinson, again, this staunch, venerated conservative, said this is Wilkinson. I think it's Wilkinson. Someone in that Fourth Circuit opinion makes a great point. They go, if the government can do this to this guy, he didn't have any, he was not a legal permanent resident. He was not a green card holder, not a citizen. But by that logic, they can snap up a green card holder. They could snap up a citizen.
Yeah.
They could snap up a citizen and go and drop him in name your country and in Bolivia and go, whoops, we screwed up, but he's gone now, so nothing we can do, right?
Due process is not what it was before January 20th, and that's a huge problem.
And let me make that point too. Like, I do resent when people in my position and elsewhere say there needs to be some due process. The response is always, what, you're in favor of this gang? You want the plane turned around? You want these gang members in your... No. My position with respect to anyone who's here illegally or has committed a crime is the same position that I had with respect to every person I prosecuted in my 14 years as a prosecutor, which is, if there is proof, if I can prove to whatever the due process standard is in a criminal case beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed crimes, I want them locked up. And if this person's here illegally, I want them deported, but I also want it done within the rules. I never had any desire to convict anyone outside of the rule book, and nor should any prosecutor. And I feel the same whether it's when you're talking about criminal prosecutions or deportations. If people are violating the law, fine.
Sure.
Play it by the book, give them their due process, make the showing you have to make, and then whatever the consequences are, they will be. And a political rhetorical device that keeps getting turned on anyone who says there needs to be due process is, oh, boo-hoo, are you sobbing for these MS-13 members? No, I'm not.
Or worse, they name a victim and they say, did so-and-so have due process?
Which is such a non sequitur. It's
insanity because then why do we have people in prison in this country? Why don't we just arrest them, suspect them of committing a crime, and then shoot them?
Right? I mean, we could just go
get rid of the courts.
I did murder cases. If I had stood up in a courtroom and go, I'm just thinking the name of one guy who was, Frank Heidel was a victim in a murder case I did. If I stood up and go, did they give Frank Heidel due process when they shot him? No, they did not. Therefore, they get new. I mean, I would be immediately.
It is the most moronic thing in the world because, we have criminals, but that doesn't mean they don't deserve due process. In this SCOTUS ruling last night, they said the following, quote, the district court should clarify its directive with due regard for the deference owed to the executive branch in the conduct of foreign affairs. What the hell does that mean?
So what that means is the core argument that the administration made here is you, the judiciary, whether you're a district court judge on up to Supreme Court, you can't tell us how to conduct foreign policy, how to deal with international affairs. And there is, look, that's not a ridiculous position. It is here, but stated broadly, it's not a ridiculous position. And so what the Supreme Court is telling the district court, the trial court, who now has the case back is, look, basically, I'm going to paraphrase here, stay on them, stay on the government. We all know what they're supposed to do. They are going to have to answer questions from you if they don't do it, right? But you can't quite say, I hereby command you to procure this body by any means necessary. I mean, let's take it out of the scenario. Look, as I said before, we could easily get this person back. He's in a prison that we're essentially controlling. But what if it was some other country and the country took him hostage? You can't necessarily dictate what the terms are going to be of the return. You know what I mean? Like for example, when Brittany Griner was a prisoner in Russia, the courts would not have been within their rights to say, hey, Joe Biden, President Biden, I order you to get Brittany Griner back here by Wednesday, because he'd be like, whoa, this is
Right.
complicated. This is up to me how to do this. So it's a very different factual scenario, but that's the legal principle that's in play here.
What do you make of Trump's revenge executive order against former top Homeland Security officials Miles Taylor and Chris
Before you said
Krebs?
that, I was going to say, I need you to be more specific. Which one? Look,
on what grounds is DOJ to investigate them? And is this a clear abuse of power?
There's nothing. I wrote my piece that's up today in the New York Magazine is about exactly. Last week, I wrote a piece about the targeting of law firms, and then this week I actually have a piece that was 90% written about immigration, and then this new thing popped where he's targeted Miles and Chris Krebs. I know Miles Taylor a little bit, I guess I should say, just for disclosure purposes or whatever. I know Chris Krebs a little bit too.
Yeah, Miles has been on this podcast.
Yeah, there is no defending this. There's no defending it. And I want the opportunity. I had a Republican congressman who was supposed to come on with me at SiriusXM this morning. And I was going to really press him about this. And they canceled for other reasons, I guess. But you cannot defend this. What Trump has did, let's get past the law firm thing. I think is outrageous. He's targeting any law firm that's ever represented anyone or any cause he doesn't like. Some of the law firms are capitulating, including a few more this week that sort of slid under the radar and entered deals. And they're all sort of taking cover because we're all focused on the Paul Weiss and Skadden, the first two. I should say again, I worked at Covington. I started my career at Covington, one of the targeted firms that has not settled yet. Some of the other firms, Wilmer and others, have gone to court and won, by and large,
Jenner
won.
and Block.
Right. So I think other firms should follow that and go in and fight. Now, it's one thing. It's bad to target these law firms, but they're multi-billion-dollar corporations. No one's going to go to prison. Now you're talking about individuals, private individuals. And I urge your viewers, it's on the whitehouse.gov or whatever. Read these proclamations by the president. It is beyond Orwellian. It's like Christopher Krebs, I'm paraphrasing here, but like a bad faith actor who spreads dissonance and who is harmful to the, who poses risks. It's like, what? I mean, all Chris Krebs ever did was speak out publicly and say the 2020 election was not rigged. It was very fair. And Miles Taylor wrote, the anonymous book and all that, and has been very publicly critical of Trump. But Trump also has ordered them both investigated by the Justice Department. And I do think it's worth saying, I would be a little trepidatious if I was Miles. I mean, I think it's bullshit that he's being investigated. I don't think there's any basis. But, Miles wrote this book, Anonymous, which I guess is probably 200, 300 pages. And they're going to go through, DOJ, Pam Bondi is going to go through this book, or not she, but, people at DOJ, and look at every little sentence and say, is this classified? Was this sensitive data? Ordinarily, when you write a book, when you leave the government, if you talk to people who've worked at FBI or DOJ, you have to run it through the government for like a security check, and they will go through and go, you're all good except page 14, that has to come out. And he didn't, I assume he didn't do that if he was writing as anonymous. So I hope that for his sake, that he was able to make those judgments. But what Pam Bondi ought to do, I'm gonna do something surprising here. I'm gonna mildly defend Bill Barr, who, as you know, Andy, I wrote my first book criticizing called The Hatchet Man. Bill Barr had a line. And Bill Barr used DOJ in corrupt and dishonest ways defensively to protect Trump, to protect him against Mueller, protect Michael Flynn, to protect Roger Stone. But one thing Bill Barr never did is use DOJ as an offensive weapon, right? There were plenty of times when Trump tweeted or whatever, I want Joe Biden imprisoned right now. I want John Kerry investigated. I want Andy McCabe locked up, all this. Bill Barr never did that. He basically just would ignore it and let the tantrum pass. Pam Bondi is different, a very different creation than Bill Barr. Pam Bondi is frothing at the mouth to use DOJ. I mean, look at her at the cabinet meeting yesterday. Oh, Mr. President, you're all powerful and all wise. And I think Pam Bondi has shown herself to be completely partisan and have zero independence. We'll see. But I don't have faith in her.
It's kind of scary, though, when the Department of Justice is being weaponized this way, isn't it?
Well, to me, the red line that I've been watching really is, look, they dismissed the indictment against Eric Adams. I thought that was an outrage, essentially in exchange for him supporting their policy concerns. But again, the red line, similar to what I was saying, is do they start actually criminally investigating and indicting their enemies list? Do they indict Jack Smith? And look, Andy, I've been critical of Jack Smith's tactics, but Jack Smith didn't do anything within 1,000 miles of anything criminal. Do they indict Krebs or Miles Taylor? Do they, find some way to indict Andrew Weiss, whoever, all of which would be insane. And, I do get a little bit nervous for these folks. To their credit, none of them have, publicly expressed any nervousness. I think that's awesome. But I know as a prosecutor, it's an old saying, if what's the study? Everyone commits 8 felonies a day or something like that. I'm sure that's overstated, but if you were to go through every line of every disclosure form any of them had to fill in, every financial disclosure they had to, when you're in the government, you have to fill out these long forms. Every, everything they ever said in any written report, they're going through all their emails, their texts, their taxes, who knows? You can probably find something on anybody. And so if they get to that point with any of these enemies where we're seeing indictments, that's going to be next level crazy.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and that is the big question, because there is a lot of room between harassment and investigation and actual criminal prosecution and indictment. Do you think, we know Trump's a bully, we know he likes to do the former. Mm-hmm. In terms of the latter, you were a prosecutor. Some people say, hey, a prosecutor can indict a sausage. I don't think courts, you tell me if I'm wrong, but judges would not want to see the DOJ waltz into court with some bullshit indictment against Chris Krebs or anybody else on the perceived enemies list. And that shit like that would be thrown out immediately, no?
Well, I agree with you, but just the mere existence of an investigation by DOJ in itself is a huge risk, expense, cost,
Sure.
right? I mean, I don't know I know plenty of people who've been investigated by DOJ and not indicted, some of whom I investigated and did not ultimately indict, but also friends. And it is a nightmare. I mean, even if you dodge an indictment, it's a financial nightmare. It's stress. It's, reputationally, professionally, et cetera. If they do indict, they're going to have, look, it's hard to say because I don't know what the evidence is, but if they bring some bullshit indictment against Krebs or whoever, there are roadblocks. First of all, you have to convince a grand jury. And yes, prosecutors can convince most grand juries to do most anything, but it's a little bit of a check. Then you got a judge who's going to take a real skeptical view of any of these BS indictments. You're going to have prosecutors resigning, refusing to do this case. Mm-hmm. And if it were ever to reach trial, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's say hypothetically somebody did have some classified information in a book that's not like war plans or anything, or that's ancient and whatever. I don't believe a judge would even let that go to trial. I think a judge would probably, again, it's hard to say this in the hypothetical, but I think you're right. There's going to be substantial obstacles between any indictment and any conviction, and then even beyond that, a sentence of imprisonment, an appeals. I mean, take some solace in there's a lot of safeguards in place. Mm-hmm. It still sucks, but there are some safeguards.
So as a former prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, what's your take on Trump's Wednesday morning stock buy call? If you were still working at SDNY, would you open up a little case here in terms of market manipulation, insider trading? And then more importantly, given that Trump controls Department of Justice, FBI, SEC, and Congress, who's going to investigate this, even if it is complete, absolute market manipulation?
Well, the answer to the second part is nobody. I mean, and we got the answer to that with the Signal controversy, which, by the way, has now been swamped by 4 other matters. But I mean, I made a big deal about this at the time. The fact that Pam Bondi utterly refused to even open an investigation, then comes out and announces, based on nothing, that everything was totally fine.
What do you make of the Inspector General investigation on that case? Isn't that
by the Department of Defense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of toothless. Like, at most they'll come out with some recommendations and all that. And ultimately, even if an Inspector General says, well, there might be something criminal here, guess where that goes?
Yeah. I mean, but I guess the point is that the rapidity with which Trump barrages us with daily chaos, perhaps rightly so, the Signalgate case has kind of disappeared from the news media, perhaps temporarily. But behind the scenes, it doesn't seem like that's gone away.
No, it'll come back. I mean, we'll get reports and that kind of thing on what was done and remedial measures. But and again, I'm not saying there was definitely some crime committed. I mean, there's too much we don't know.
Right.
But every president going back at least through the Reagan era has had to, going back to Watergate, has had to, and this is sort of the subject of my next book, has had to endure some sort of internal DOJ prosecution that he hated. I mean, whether from Watergate to Iran-Contra during Bush and Reagan and Bush, God knows Bill Clinton had Ken Starr and all that stuff. Pat Fitzgerald investigating Scooter Libby and Karl Rove and all them, on down the line, up through Mueller and and Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Jack Smith, all this. But now there's going to be none of that. And even if you look at high-level officials mishandling classified information, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, they all were investigated intensely. One of them, Donald Trump, was indicted for it. So to say we're not even going to open the book, to me is an outrage, but it also shows what Pam Bondi's made of.
Yeah. What do you make of the yet another major scandal, which is this IRS situation where you have the commissioner quitting, you have several top officials resigning because they're breaking the law?
Well, so the IRS has agreed to share information with ICE to help ICE try to track down, illegals, people who are here illegally. It's a definitely a major change in course. I mean, IRS information was always held as highly, highly confidential. When I was at DOJ, we were only allowed as prosecutors to access IRS information if we got approval within DOJ, then approval from a judge to show some specific need. And the fact that they're sort of opening the books to ICE is definitely a change. It's not entirely clear whether it's illegal or legal, but it's a huge change in the way IRS has handled its information. It's seen as we want people to pay taxes. And by the way, people who are here illegally do pay taxes. It's something like $60 billion worth. And now you're sort of changing the deal on them and giving them reason to not pay taxes. And it will be challenged in court. I frankly, it's debatable whether it's illegal, but it's a major change in the way IRS operates.
Last question. What's the biggest thing happening right now? Or what in your opinion, what's the biggest thing coming in the next several days, week?
Well, to look at it broadly, look, we are, it's interesting because we've had a complete change in media coverage. If you go back, Andy, and look at your podcast episodes from 2001 to 2004, 90% of the Trump ones were about his indictments, I'm sure him as a criminal defendant, him as a civil defendant. That's gone. That just died a very sudden death on election day. And what's happening now is different, but to me it's more consequential because what happens to Donald Trump is one person ultimately. I'm not saying that was not consequential. It was enormously. But now we are reshaping the very structure of our government, the balance of powers. How much power does the executive branch have with respect to Congress and the judiciary? This is reshaping our government. This is going to be stuff that's studied by law students 50, 75, 100 years from now. So these opinions that are coming out of the Supreme Court, even on a daily basis, are changing that and influencing that. If I had to pick one that's left, a lot of this immigration stuff is, all these rulings basically are temporary. So they're all going to come back up in some respect or another. Watch, though, the birthright citizenship case. I was just talking to one of our Supreme Court experts, and I said, and she reminded me, there's still one big one on the emergency docket that's pending, which is Trump trying to basically gut the constitutional principle of birthright citizenship, which says that any person born or naturalized in the U.S. is a citizen. I think he's going to lose. I don't think the justices are going to, there's a way to sort of like try to give this very like tortured reading of that says, well, maybe not if the parents aren't citizens or aren't here legally, which I think has been rejected by the court before many years ago in the 1800s. But I think he's going to lose. But again, I think it's an example of trying to just take something that was fairly clear on the face of the Constitution that's long been accepted and just throw it out the window. But I do think the court's going to reject him. So watch for birthright. Now that we've sort of gotten the first batch of immigration rulings in, that's the next big one.
Elie, my brother, thanks as always. Great conversation. Come back
Thanks,
again
Andy.
soon.
Love talking to you. I appreciate it.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Lengyel. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.